Hello, I'm Dr. Nathan Stahl. I'm a geriatrician at Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital, and I'm also the Assistant Scientific Director of Ontario's COVID-19 Science Advisory Table. I'm here today to present a session on COVID-19 vaccination. I'd like to thank my colleagues at 19 to 0 Canada, who have created much of the material that I'm going to present today. They are a group of experts and individuals working to promote and educate Canada's population on the benefits of COVID-19 vaccination. I'd in particular like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Noah Ivers in Toronto and Dr. Cora Constantinescu, who have helped prepare these slides. Today, I'm going to talk about four things: the vaccines that are currently available in Canada, who can and cannot get these vaccines, some of the hesitancy around COVID-19 vaccines, and then we'll dispel some common myths and misconceptions. Let's talk about vaccines authorized in Canada. As of June 9th, over 27 million Canadians have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. That's nearly 63% of the population, and over 70% of those who are currently eligible, which are individuals 12 years of age and above. In Ontario, over 10 million people have received a first dose. Vaccines currently approved in Canada for use are the Pfizer, Moderna, which are the mRNA vaccines, and the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. For those of you who are unvaccinated, you'll be offered the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The AstraZeneca vaccine is no longer being offered for first doses in Canada, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has not yet arrived in Canada for use. The two mRNA vaccines are the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. These are a two-dose scheduled vaccination. The Pfizer vaccine, you receive it at least 21 days after your first dose, and the Moderna, you receive it at least 28 days after your first dose. The mRNA vaccines, these vaccines give instructions to our cells to make that spike protein that you see on the outside of the coronavirus. The coronavirus is like a spiky ball. And that spike protein that these instructions are given to by the mRNA are recognized by our immune cells, and antibodies are made against it. So that if you ever should be exposed to COVID-19, you already have a recognition of that spike protein in your body, and it's used to then be able to protect you from COVID-19. mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are highly effective. In the clinical trials, they showed 95% protection in the Pfizer trial and 94.1% protection in the Moderna trial from having the disease. Some people do compare those numbers and are convinced that the Pfizer vaccine is superior to the Moderna vaccine based upon this trial. That would be an incorrect comparison or an imperfect comparison, because these were not compared in the same trial. They were two different trials going on at the same time. What's important to note is there's similar efficacy with people of different races, ethnicity, and age. And the vaccines still appear to cover those new variants or those mutant strains that you will have heard about. And that's quite important because these vaccines remain very effective, the mRNA vaccines. I know that I'm speaking to an audience of people who work with a population that's near and dear to me, people who live in long-term care homes. And the vaccines have had a stunning impact in the province of Ontario on COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 has had a devastating impact, and I thank you all for the incredible work that you've done over a really trying period. We've had three major waves in the province of Ontario. The first wave of the pandemic went from February 26th to August 31st. We know that nearly 6,000 residents got infected and over 1,800 long-term care residents died. In wave two, from September 1st, 2020 to February 28th, 2021, more residents died, nearly 1,900. And then this third wave from March, which is still ongoing, but data here is presented till the end of May, 27 residents died. And that is primarily due to the really incredible impact of COVID-19 vaccinations. You'll also know that we've had thousands of long-term care staff who have become infected with COVID-19, and tragically 11 who have died. And as I'll show you, the impact of the vaccine has had a huge impact on staff safety as well. This is research I actually helped lead. We looked at the early impact of COVID-19 vaccines on long-term care homes. What you see in those curves in the bottom left are the long-term care residents, and in the bottom right are the healthcare workers who work in long-term care homes. I don't want to get too lost into the details, but you'll notice that those curves start to separate. And this is at the beginning of that really bad second wave we had in Ontario. And the darker blue curves are those who are vaccinated, and that's the long-term care residents and the healthcare workers. And above are the individuals in the community who didn't have access to the vaccines at the time. And you see those curves start to separate. The protection is given to those individuals from this really deadly disease of COVID-19. And we found early on, just with one dose, it decreased the risk of COVID-19 by about 89% among residents and about 79% among staff. And that was with not even all the residents and staff having received their first dose at the time. And that's led to this remarkable curve. One of the things that makes me feel so secure every day is knowing the tremendous impact that vaccines have had on our long-term care residents. What you see here are the three waves of the pandemic. The green curves are long-term care residents. The bluish curves are people who live in the community who are older adults 70 years and above, but don't live in long-term care homes. You know, during the first wave, we had a huge number of people getting infected in long-term care. During the second wave, we had a really large number as well, even more people in the community. And what's remarkable is that third wave that we're just coming out of in Ontario, where we had a large number of older people in the community becoming infected with COVID-19, but that curve remains nearly flat in terms of long-term care residents who are becoming infected, and that's because of that vaccination. We found that the majority of outbreaks, and we continue to find the majority of outbreaks that we have in these homes are being caused by staff who are not yet vaccinated against COVID-19. But certainly the impact among our residents has been tremendous. And it's something that's really, really, really notable. But there is still work to do. Even some of these small outbreaks, even with some residents who have been vaccinated, have led to the death of long-term care residents. And that's why it is essential and critically important to have all long-term care staff who are able and eligible to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Let's talk about the dosing of COVID-19 vaccines. There's been a lot of talk about this in our country. NACI, which is National Advisory Council on Immunization, that has created guidance for our country, and I sit on one of the working groups and have participated in these discussions, did create early guidance to extend the interval for vaccines. In the clinical trials, as I mentioned early on, the Pfizer dose was given after 3 weeks, and the Moderna dose was given after 4 weeks. In our country, we did not have as many vaccines up front as other places like Israel or even the United States. And an early and very wise decision was made to extend the interval between those first and second doses for up to 4 months. What this did was provide more vaccines to individuals in our country, more first doses to protect more Canadians, and this definitely saved lives. Now vaccine supply is actually more plentiful, and that interval has been reduced, and people are able to get their shots at a shorter interval. But you may have heard that people are getting their doses at longer intervals. What we are also coming to learn is that extending that interval may actually confer more immunity or protection for those individuals. So that is something that is a common thing that people worry about, the extended dose interval. But as I say, for unvaccinated individuals now, we have a lot of vaccine supply. That interval is likely to be much shorter than 4 months. And additionally, waiting a little longer than that 3 and 4 weeks may actually confer more immunity to individuals. And this is a decision that has saved the lives of many, many Canadians. Let's talk about something else that people worry about, adverse events or side effects, and how we monitor them. So the Pfizer vaccine. Most people can expect to feel a sore arm and a bit of tiredness and a mild headache. And that means the vaccine is working. Reactions start where that vaccine is injected, and that's how you know that your body has received that message to make those antibodies against that spike protein. Rarely, and I'll show you, some people can get what's called anaphylaxis or a acute allergic reaction. That's why we monitor every individual with medical personnel on site, and that event rate is extremely low, around 4 in a million. So as you see, the very common side effects are pain, fatigue, headache, muscle pain, and chills, joint pain. The Moderna vaccine has very similar side effects because they're very similar vaccines. And again, it's mainly around pain, fatigue, headache, and muscle pain, and that's very short-lived, often easily treated with Tylenol. What should I remember from the side effects of this vaccine? 8 in 10 people complain of a sore arm, but only 1 in 100 call that soreness severe. 5 in 10 people complain of fatigue and headache, but only about 1 in 10 need Advil or Tylenol. And again, some reaction to the vaccine is expected. I had some arm pain myself, but the majority are mild and easily manageable, and that was the case for me and my peers and individuals I know that have received the vaccine. Let's talk about the regulatory systems and surveillance of vaccines in our country. So let's go to vaccine development, because there are some fears that the development and study of this was rushed, which is absolutely not true. We knew that there was a global pandemic and that we needed to mobilize all available scientific resources and development resources so that literally we could save the world from the scourge of COVID-19. What was remarkable was the technology used to make those Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Although this is the first time that it's being used in a vaccine for an infectious disease like COVID-19, that technology had been approved and had been developed and had been studied for many years before this. So what happened was scientists developed this potential vaccine. They then do some lab studies on animals. We have 3 phases of a clinical trial. We have the first phase of volunteers is to determine if the vaccine is safe and if there are side effects. The phase 2 is hundreds of volunteers. How well does that vaccine work, and is it safe on a larger number of people? And phase 3 is thousands of volunteers. Those were the clinical results I showed you, where it was 94 to 95% effective. And then after that, after the clinical trial, an application is submitted to Health Canada for review, and Health Canada approved the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in December of 2020. What does Health Canada do at that time? They conduct a thorough and independent review of all the data. They approve it if it's safe, if it works, and if it meets the manufacturing standards, and if the benefits outweigh the risks. This is then distributed. Canadians have access to the vaccine. And what's really important is that monitoring doesn't stop there. Phase 3 had thousands of volunteers. But now across the world, there has been millions and millions and millions of people vaccinated. And in Canada, as I showed you, there have already been millions of people vaccinated. We continue to monitor for side effects. We continue to monitor globally, and we learn more about these vaccines as we move along. What's missing after a rapid development and regulatory approval? So just to be clear, new serious adverse events from a vaccine are unlikely to emerge greater than 6 weeks after vaccine administration. What we need to know, and what we are beginning to learn, is that we need to know how long these vaccines last, and when we may need to give a booster shot. And then again, in the clinical trials, the first ones that were done, we didn't have all populations included, and so we continue to learn about that. Children, pregnant and breastfeeding women, and we start to accumulate that data and complete other clinical trials that have been going on to learn about those special populations. I spoke about that national surveillance for adverse effects following immunization. So vaccines on the market, not just the COVID-19 vaccine, but every vaccine is monitored continuously. We speak about adverse effects following immunization, or AEFI, A-E-F-I in Canada. And this is closely monitored at a federal level with input from all the provinces and territories. And then the officials in Canada are also in continuous communication and contact with international counterparts to collect data together and study vaccine adverse effects and safety. So what do we know about vaccine monitoring in Canada? This was actually current as of May 28th. Apologies that it says April 2nd there. It's actually, I updated this to May 28th. We have seen no new safety signals. The one safety signal we saw was the blood clotting issue, which was associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. That continues to be monitored, and based on that surveillance, that vaccine is no longer being offered as a first dose. We have administered many, many more of those mRNA vaccines, those Pfizer and Moderna vaccines in our country. We've seen no new safety signals. And that's out of nearly 23 million doses that have been administered as of May 28th. You'll note here that there are a total of 6,408 adverse effects that have been reported. That's 0.028% of all doses administered. And of those 6,408, 1,262 were considered serious, and that's 0.006%. So a very, very small number have been considered serious to date. If we actually look at what those adverse effects are, and I plotted the graph that we have from Health Canada, you'll see that the majority of those adverse effects that are reported are vaccination site pain, redness at the site. Some people have itching. There's some headache, nausea, fatigue. You do have people who have had hives. That's less than 600 of all the 23 million people who have been vaccinated. And as I mentioned, we have not had any new serious safety signals other than that blood clotting issue associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. You've probably heard a lot these days about the variants of concern, in particular the Delta variant, which was the variant first identified in India. This is a chart to show you. Our second wave was the B.1.1.7, now called the Alpha variant. That Delta has a really complicated name, the B.1.617.2. What's problematic about these variants and why it's really important to get vaccinated is transmissibility. This means it's more infectious, it spreads easier among unvaccinated individuals. And that compares to the original strain of COVID-19. What you see here on the right, though, is that the vaccine is effective against all those variants. What's also important to note here is that there's a column there of immune evasiveness. This means that it's really, really important to get 2 shots of the vaccine as compared to 1, especially with the Delta variant, that variant first identified in India. But it's important to note that all vaccines are still effective and are remarkably effective against these variants. Let's talk about special circumstances in populations. So what is a contraindication, or what is a reason why someone cannot immediately get the vaccine? If you've had a severe allergic reaction after previous administration of these or any mRNA vaccine. And that's usually an allergy to something called polyethylene glycol and polysorbate, which is the compound contained within the vaccine. This is exceedingly rare, and people who do have these allergies, they can see their healthcare provider to discuss what options they may have, but for the overwhelming majority of Canadians, they would not have reactions to this compound. When would you need precautions? If you're someone who may have symptoms of confirmed or suspected SARS-CoV-2 infection, there's a funny sort of terminology we use. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. When you get sick, it's called COVID-19 illness. So you need to wait until you're recovered, until you get that vaccine. Individuals who have gotten another vaccine in the past 14 days. And, for Pfizer, it's now individuals outside the authorized group. We've moved that down to 12. So we're not giving to less than 12. That would be a reason why someone could not get the vaccine. COVID-19 infection, if you've had it, it's safe for those who have had a previous infection. And in fact, it's recommended. A 90-day period is recommended, and this wouldn't pertain to most people, but for those who have received convalescent plasma treatment, we're not really using that anymore in Canada. The clinical trials have stopped. Or those who have received antibody treatment specific for COVID-19, again, something not being used in Canada. The other special circumstances, which you may be asked when if you do decide to go get the vaccine, and I hope you do, if you have a bleeding problem, there's no need to stop your blood thinning medications or your anticoagulants. You just need to apply some extra pressure over the site. And people who are autoimmune immunocompromised, consider the risks and the benefits. This is where you're going to want to talk to your healthcare provider, but the overwhelming number of individuals with autoimmune conditions should still go on to receive the vaccine, but you do want to have that conversation with them, with your specialist, your primary care practitioner. Can these vaccines be given to pregnant and breastfeeding women? Yes. People who are pregnant or breastfeeding should be offered vaccines at any time if they're eligible. And we do now have data showing the safety of these vaccines in pregnant individuals. When planning conception, there is a recommendation to complete both doses of vaccination before pregnancy, but for individuals who are pregnant, we do recommend giving the vaccine. We know that there is data that pregnant women are at higher risk of poor COVID-19 outcomes than non-pregnant individuals, more risk of greater disease severity, being hospitalized, and ICU admissions. And that's why it's really, really important to give this vaccine. What's important is it's not a genetic therapy. I'll dispel that myth later. And so it will not interrupt anything with genetic sequences within your body on a permanent basis. Do the vaccines work in older people? Yes, this is the population you work with. I showed you how remarkable they've been in the Ontario long-term care system. They work in older people, and the efficacy in those clinical trials was very similar among the very elderly as compared to younger individuals. Has the vaccine been tested in people of color and other minority groups? Yes, they were tested in diverse populations to ensure that they were safe and effective for everyone. In the Pfizer and Moderna trials, about 35 to 40% of the participants were Black or African American, Latino, or Hispanic, and the vaccines were equally effective in all groups. What about allergies? So I talked about Pfizer earlier on, 4.7 cases per million doses. Moderna is about 2.5 per million doses. Most of those happen after the first dose. And having anaphylaxis or an allergy to other drugs, to other foods, to animals, to the environment, these are not a contraindication or a reason why you can't get the vaccines. Those who have had a severe reaction will be observed for 30 minutes rather than 15 minutes after getting the vaccine. Again, that polyethylene glycol, a compound you would have no reason to know anything about, nor it is the main allergen of concern. So you would only know that to be an allergen of concern if you've had an allergy before and someone has determined that to be the cause of it. Long-term protection. So again, I talked about side effects occurring within 6 weeks. We need longer-term follow-up to understand how long you are protected for. We are starting to get that data, and it seems you are protected for several months. We're going to continue to monitor that over time. Let's talk about vaccine acceptance and hesitancy. I really want to make this clear. Concerns about vaccines and denial are natural. This is not something to be made to feel bad about. Denial doesn't stem from ignorance. This is something to educate, support, and validate what you may be feeling, and then hopefully discuss what the risks and benefits of vaccination are and try and move towards vaccination. But concerns and denial are natural, and we need to be able to discuss openly what your concerns may be. Healthcare workers themselves, such as you, can be vaccine hesitant. In fact, rates of vaccine hesitancy in healthcare workers mirrors that of the rest of the population. And about half of personal support workers are hesitant about COVID-19 vaccines. And so it's really important, again, to recognize that there's nothing special about healthcare workers in terms of whether or not they are going to be vaccine hesitant. What's special about them and what's special about you is that you work with a vulnerable population. We know that racialized Canadians have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic and have higher distrust of vaccine. And that's understandable. There's a history of trauma related to terrible medical experimentation and discrimination that has led to mistrust from minority communities. And that's understandable. That needs to be recognized as well. So let's talk about common misconceptions and questions. Will I still have to wear a mask after I'm vaccinated? I myself have been fully vaccinated since January of 2021. I continue to follow all the public health guidance that I'm being asked to, including wearing a mask, physical distancing. At some point, when we get a higher enough proportion of our population vaccinated, we will be able to loosen some of these restrictions. But for now, you will still need to follow the public health restrictions and the public health measures that you're being asked to. How does mRNA relate to DNA? So mRNA cannot go back into the DNA, into the nucleus of the cells, that center part of the cells where DNA is. Humans just don't have those enzymes. And so this message that's given to your body, it's degraded, and it does not enter or change your genetic code at all definitively. It's dissolved within minutes to hours. And you eat mRNA all the time. You eat mRNA when you have meat. So this is not a foreign thing that we are doing that is permanently changing your body with respect to its genetic code. It's an instruction that's given to make the antibodies to recognize that spike protein, and that instruction is dissolved and goes away in minutes to hours. Are the elderly at increased risk of death from vaccines? There was headlines that several elderly patients in Norway who received the COVID-19 vaccine, specifically the Pfizer, died. But you know from working in long-term care homes that unfortunately a lot of the residents die because of natural causes. And if you went and vaccinated a lot of individuals, some of them would die because it was their turn and they happened to get a vaccine. It wasn't caused by the vaccine. And we've seen across the world that there is no indication that older people are dying from the vaccine. They're dying with the vaccine. And it's normal to have every day in our world some older people die. And some of them are going to be recently vaccinated because we have such a sensitive and robust reporting system that I showed you. These are going to need to be reported when there's deaths. They get investigated, and this is how we start to look at issues like this. But there has been no signal in Canada that the vaccines have been linked to deaths, and not in other places like the United States, which has vaccinated many millions more people than we have in Canada. People ask, does it contain chemicals? Mercury, formaldehyde, aluminum? No, it does not. There's the medicinal ingredient, which is that mRNA. These are the non-medicinal ingredients, if you'd like to know. But it does not include those chemicals that people sometimes have concerns that it does. Will it cause infertility? Another misconception that I have seen floating around the internet and social media. There's a rumor that the antibodies will also target a protein in the placenta. And there's no data to suggest this. If this was true, you'd expect COVID-19 infection to be associated with an increased risk of miscarriage. We don't see that. What we actually see is that COVID-19 in pregnant individuals leads to more severity of illness among the mother and is not associated with miscarriages. So that dispels that notion that vaccines cause infertility. Some people say, well, should I let others go first? You know, this is much less of a concern now with the vaccine supply we are so fortunate to have in Canada, but you should take the vaccine when it's first offered to you. And there's millions of people who around the globe who have been vaccinated ahead of you by now. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I do hope this was useful. I do hope this was helpful. And please note that at any time, your primary care practitioner, your healthcare practitioner would be available to you to discuss additional concerns you may have. There are many resources online. 19 to 0 is a great collaboration and collates a lot of amazing resources. And there are many, many ways of outreach and education that has been done to try and promote vaccination. But I want to underscore that I appreciate you watching and listening to this. I appreciate and I understand and I'm hearing the concerns that you have about vaccination. And I hope that providing you with information about vaccine development, vaccine safety, vaccine efficacy, and dispelling some of the common notions and misconceptions, that this will help you in your decision-making about the COVID-19 vaccine. Thank you very much for listening to me. Please stay well, please stay safe, and please do consider getting vaccinated. And I wish you all the best. Thanks and take care.